William Faulkner, who used to live in New Orleans, once said, "The past isn't dead and buried, it's not even past." This idea is especially clear at St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. In this old graveyard, fancy above-ground graves are falling apart, showing the stories of the big personalities buried here. Like many spots in New Orleans, the line between the past and present seems almost invisible here. Hi, my name is Alina. Welcome to or welcome back to my channel. Over 100,000 people visit St. Louis Cemetery every year. Many want to see the grave of Marie Laveau, who is considered the voodoo queen. Some people come here to take care of their family's graves because this cemetery is still used for burials. It's the oldest cemetery in New Orleans, built in 1789, and walking through it is like taking a step into the city's past. This cemetery is also known to be one of the most haunted cemeteries in the whole United States. Some people also call it the City of the Dead, with more than 700 tombs in just one block. For more than 200 years, there have been stories of people witnessing paranormal activity in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, and a lot of people want to visit it at night and try to talk to the ghosts. You can see how old this cemetery is by looking at the broken shells and stones from the Noire lake and river that make up the path. The above-ground tombs where people are buried are falling apart, and the whole cemetery feels like a maze where only ghosts can figure out the way. Many of the family tombs have strange symbols on them, and some have been either damaged by people or just by getting old. It's not surprising that movie makers want to film here. Easy Rider and The Interview with a Vampire are some of the famous movies shot here. Mark Twain also used to call this cemetery the City of the Dead, and it's just such a fitting name. In New Orleans, people are buried above ground because the city's ground is too wet. So if they buried coffins in the ground, they would just float up again. St. Louis Cemetery used to be on the edge of the city in a swampy area, but as they drained the swamps, people could live further away from the French Quarter, so now the cemetery is more towards the center of the city. When you go into St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, you'll see walls with tombs stacked on top of each other like filing cabinets. Some of the graves are partially underground because the city is slowly sinking. The cemetery is located on Basin Street, just outside of the French Quarter. Starting in March 2015, the Archdiocese of New Orleans made new rules. Now you can only go into the cemetery with a guide. This change was made in order to stop people from damaging the cemetery, which has been a problem for a long time. The actual oldest cemetery is under the roads and houses of the French Quarter, and it's called St. Peter Street Cemetery. We know about it because in 2011, 15 waterlogged coffins were found in someone's backyard. This shows that New Orleans was built right on top of the first burial ground. From 1725 to the 1780s, St. Peter Street Cemetery was where people were buried, but as the city grew and diseases spread, there wasn't enough space for all the dead. The Spanish government closed the cemetery and looked for a new place. The Spanish governor had specific requests that changed how death was handled in New Orleans. The Spanish consul decided that new graveyards had to be far from the French Quarter. People were scared that dead bodies could make people sick, so the cabildo said that all future graveyards should be in a swamp. But because water table was high, flooding became a problem. However, land was really valuable in early New Orleans, so they came up with this idea of above-ground tombs in order to save space for the city to grow. Some say Governor mirrors Spanish background, and the Spanish cabildo influenced the way tombs and crypts were used in New Orleans because of Spanish traditions. So in 1789, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 opened its doors after the St. Peter Cemetery closed. At first, the cemetery plots weren't organized well. The graves were sorted by religion: Catholic, non-Catholic, Protestant, and slaves. For about 40 years, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 was the main burial ground in the city before Most cemeteries were built farther away from the French Quarter. In the past, how the city didn't care about the St. Peter Street Cemetery, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 also faced problems because the city was growing. Tremay, a new neighborhood, grew near the cemetery in the early 1800s. The French Quarter also needed more space in the late 1700s, so parts of the cemetery were lost. In 1897, Storyville, the city's red light district, was set up by the cemetery, also causing problems. As a result, rich people started buying tombs in other places, and St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, the oldest cemetery in the city, started to get ignored. But things got better in the 1900s. People wanted to make this area look nice again. The Archdiocese of New Orleans and groups like Save Our Cemeteries helped fix up St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Now it's a beautiful and historic place that many people visit each year, making it one of the top spots in the city. That's an interesting question. You might be surprised that a lot of cemeteries aren't actually haunted despite what people normally think. When someone passes away, it's likely that there are a lot more places for them to be at rather than hanging out around their grave. But St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 has been famous for its hauntings for almost 200 years now, and people often claim that they've seen or felt the otherworldly presence. So why do people see ghosts so often at St. Louis Cemetery No. 1? Some people want to believe they've seen something even if it wasn't really there, and plus the cemetery adds to the spooky atmosphere with its all run-down look. For hundreds of years, lots of people from New Orleans have been buried in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, and it's not just regular folks. There are some very famous and unique individuals who have been laid to rest here as well. So let's take a closer look at some of the most well-known spirits believed to wander these grounds. Marie Laveau was a special person buried in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 in New Orleans. She was married officially once, but later lived with a Creole man named Christophe Dominique Duminy de Glapion. They had about 15 children together. Marie Laveau was famous as the Voodoo Queen, and people believe she could do magic and predict the future. She also helped people by giving them herbal medicines. Many people in the 1800s were scared and amazed by her magical powers. When she died in 1881, some people thought that she turned out to be immortal because they saw her walking around the French Quarter the next day looking young and full of energy. But actually it was her daughter Marie Laveau II pretending to be her mom for a long time. Some say Marie Laveau was a hairdresser, and others think that she imported liquor on Dauphine Street. We might never know her secrets, but we can visit her tomb at St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. Madame Delphine Lalaurie was a rich woman from New Orleans who became well known for how she was treating her slaves. She tortured them and killed them. She was born around 1775 after her family moved from Ireland to New Orleans. In 1800 she married a Spanish officer, and in 1804 they went to Spain. On the way there she had a daughter named Marie, but her husband passed away before they even reached Madrid. Lalaurie went back to New Orleans and married a banker. They had 4 children together. Her husband passed away 8 years later. Then she married Dr. Leonard Lalaurie in 1825 and moved into a famous mansion. In 1834, there was a fire in a lady's kitchen. When the police came, they found out something terrible. The lady's cook, an old woman, was chained to the kitchen stove. Some even say that she started this fire as an attempt to unalive herself. She was scared of being punished because she thought she would be sent to the attic, where all other slaves were afraid to go. The police searched the attic and found something horrifying. They found slaves whose arms and legs have been stretched out and they were hanging by their necks. People in the town got angry and attacked the Lalaurie mansion. But Delphine Lalaurie disappeared, and by 1836 her mansion was empty, and we don't know what happened to her after that. Bernard de Marigny was a famous person in New Orleans. He was born in 1785 into a very rich family. When he was just 15 years old, his father passed away and left him a lot of money. But instead of using it wisely, he spent it on gambling, buying lots of things, and making bad business deals. But he also helped keep French alive in government and schools after Louisiana became part of America in 1803. He helped write the first state rules after Louisiana became a state in 1812. He also supported kids born out of wedlock to have the same rights as kids born in marriage. Now there is a nice neighborhood called Faubourg Marigny next to the French Quarter. It has colorful houses and a charming atmosphere. This neighborhood exists because Bernard decided to divide his land and sell it to French Creoles instead of Americans. Bernard de Marigny's influence can still be seen in New Orleans and southern Louisiana. Many people visit his tomb in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 to remember him. Barthélemy Lafon was a very famous architect and land surveyor in the late 1700s and early 1800s. He came to New Orleans from France after a big fire in 1788. Even though the fire caused a lot of damage, it created a need for new buildings which worked for Lafon. He fixed up buildings like Presbytery, the Cabildo, and the jail after another fire in 1794. Lafon also divided the Delord Sarpy plantation, which is now part of the Central Business District and the Lower Garden District, including Lee Circle. Besides his architectural work, Lafon did other things for the city. He made maps that were used all over the world, and he even made the city's first almanac. But Lafon was also connected to pirates. He owned a ship called Carmelita, which had been taken by pirates, and this connection hurt his reputation. Lafon died in 1820 during a yellow fever outbreak. After he died, there were a lot of legal battles over his money. The Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery in 1863, but African Americans in New Orleans still faced discrimination for many years. It wasn't until 1978 that the city elected its first African American mayor, Ernest Dutch Morial. Before that, Morial became the first African American to graduate from Louisiana State University with a law degree. Dutch Morial is famous for fighting against segregation, mostly through legal ways rather than protests. He became the first African American in the Louisiana State Legislature in 1967 since the Reconstruction era. Later in 1974, he became the first African American in the Louisiana 4th Circuit of Appeal. Although he wanted a third term as a mayor, he couldn't do it because of the rules. During his time as a mayor, Morial boosted employment and increased the number of black police officers. The city's convention center now carries his name. Although he was initially buried in a shared tomb, his family moved his remains to a new tomb in St. Louis Cemetery No. 3 in 2014. Henry Phineas was a sailor in the 1800s who didn't have a real home. He traveled a lot, sailing in different places. In New Orleans, he stayed at a boarding house. He worried about his important documents while he was away at sea. Before leaving for another trip, he asked the owner of the boarding house to keep his documents safe in case if Henry died. These papers included his family's tombs. The owner promised to take care of everything, but she didn't keep her promise. While Henry was at sea, she sold his family tomb. When Henry came back to New Orleans, he found out what happened. He couldn't fix the problem, and soon after he got sick and died. Because his tomb was sold, he was buried in a poor person's grave without a marker in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. People say they've seen Henry's ghost around the cemetery. They describe him as tall with blue eyes. Some visitors claim they've talked to his ghost. He often asks them if they know where his tomb is because he can't find it. Arriving even stories of him showing up at funerals asking if there is a room for him in the tomb. People have taken pictures of his ghosts and captured recordings of a man's voice saying, "I need to rest." Another ghost named Alphonse is looking for a place to rest peacefully. Sometimes he holds people's hands and stabs them. He smiles and asks them to take him home, but it's not clear which home he means. People have seen him picking flowers on other graves and leaving them on his grave. The full story of Alphonse will probably stay a mystery. The ghost who just wants to find his home. Nicolas Cage, a famous actor who is still alive and well, decided to build a tomb in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. He made this decision after facing some money problems and losing two properties in 2009 due to bankruptcy. He built a 9-foot-tall pyramid-shaped tomb with the words Omnia ab uno on it, which means everything for one in Latin. We don't really know why Nicolas Cage chose this message, but his tomb is now a popular spot in the cemetery, attracting a lot of visitors to come take pictures of it. What are the common tomb styles in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1? First of all, family tombs. But why did the early French and Spanish settlers in the 1700s choose these tombs? In southern Mediterranean coastal areas, the soil was rocky and hard to dig, especially for 6-foot graves. So people built above-ground tombs that reached towards the sky, solving the problem. When these colonists came to New Orleans, which was tough to live in back then, they brought their burial traditions. These tombs are often found in places with strong Roman Catholic influence. Even though they look small, they can hold many generations of one family. There's a rule that says only one family member at a time can be buried here for 1 year and 1 day. If more family members pass away during that time, the second one gets a temporary tomb until they can be moved to the family tomb. In St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, you'll see tall white walls that look like a strong fortress. But if you look closely, you'll notice some parts where the white cotton is cracking and chipping off because of the hot sun and humid weather. The walls also seem to be leaning a bit, showing signs of aging over the years. These walls might seem like regular fences from the outside, but they're different. They're actually walls that hold tombs where dead people are kept. These wall tombs were used when family tombs were not available because of the rule that says that you have to wait for a 1 year and a day before using them again. So the recently deceased would stay in these wall tombs temporarily. During times of diseases like yellow fever, when many people died, these wall tombs became very important because there wasn't enough space. Sometimes many generations of a family were buried together in one wall tomb because they couldn't afford their own tomb or mausoleum. Society tombs are like a mix of family tombs and wall tombs. They look similar to family tombs but hold many individuals like wall tombs do. For a long time, these tombs have held the remains of people from different groups such as religious organizations, clubs, and law enforcement. In St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, you can find a lot of these society tombs. Some famous ones are the French Mutual Benevolent Society, the New Orleans Musicians Tomb, and the Orleans Battalion of Artillery tomb. People choose to be buried in these tombs for different reasons. Some people do because they are part of a group or because of where they're from. Others do it because they can't afford their own tomb and this is a cheaper version for them. While not as common as in other cemeteries of New Orleans, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 has some coffin graves. They are called coffins because they have marble or granite walls around them that hold in the soil. Coffin graves are usually only a few feet tall. They were common in places influenced by Roman Catholicism, like the tombs, and also in the Eastern Mediterranean areas with people of different religions. If you want to be buried in the cemetery, you can, but it comes with a price. However, it's fair when you think about the people who will be your eternal neighbors. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!